My name is Phil Perazio, and I'm a urologic oncologist, a surgeon. Like many of you, I absolutely love what I do, and I would not choose another profession. But I have struggled with professional identity, practice efficiency, and wellness over the years. Operate with Zen is a podcast designed to explore a mindful approach to surgery and to being a surgeon. By discussing these struggles and mindful solutions, I hope together we can create a community of strong and healthy surgeons. Enjoy. All right, everyone, and welcome to Operate with Zen. Today, we've got the great pleasure of being joined by Tanya Ivey-Bloom. Tanya, introduce yourself to the audience.
Hello there. So I am Tanya Ivey-Bloom, a nurse practitioner at the Brady Urological Institute at Johns Hopkins Hospital, mother of three, major in the United States Army Reserves, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so it's a real pleasure to have you. Tanya and I got to know each other. We shared the practice together for, almost 2 years before I transitioned to Penn. We shared a lot of patients. We shared some learning experiences, and we shared a lot of discussions about medicine and the military and things that we can all learn from each other through those experiences. So we're here today to talk about some contrasts and comparisons between medicine, military medicine, and the military in general. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. Love it.
All right. So one of the things I wanted to start with in his book called Attending, Ronald Epstein talks about the military medicine and mindfulness and some of the real contrast. So I'll start with just some of the comparisons, and that'll start our conversation. So in both military medicine, there are ongoing and extreme physical and emotional stresses. And obviously they're different in those circumstances, but ongoing and extreme stresses. We all go through rigorous and all-consuming training. We both have the dictum to first do no harm. We deal with complex problems that require mental stability, effective communication, ethical conduct, and the wisdom to manage the unexpected. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how these apply to your experiences.
So, I do think for sure that what that statement that you just made basically is valid. I think it also shapes those in military medicine, share the same standards, high standards that are required on the civilian side as well. And then in addition to that, I would say, an additional aspect to that would be the leadership requirement, and having to kind of shift into taking all of that you just said, and then applying the component of leadership and how am I going to effectively manage all of that you just said, and then in addition to everything else that's required to lead as a soldier, because in the military and in the Army in particular, we're soldiers first, and your job is second.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Both constructs have leadership built into them, but it is much more, I don't know if formal is the right word, but at least objective in the military, where you know your role, you know your responsibilities, not only to those above you, but to those beneath you.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So in medicine and in the military, one of the things that I would say practitioners are acutely aware of is that what they do or fail to do affects the entire group, not just their patients, but their subordinates as well. And so for physicians, of course, who are the gold standard and who lead the way in medicine, that means ensuring that everyone on their team is trained up appropriately. And so that's sharing the wisdom and their knowledge base with the advanced practice providers, the nurses, the medics, okay, the OR techs, the RTs, the everyone that's involved in and on the team, because the sense is that, and is very real, okay, especially, you know, depending on the situation or the environment. If it's a combat environment, the, you know, the physician is acutely aware that if he or she goes down, then the ball keeps rolling, and folks, you know, patients, you know, which are service members, still have to be taken care of. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important. And I don't think, you know, being in civilian medicine, I don't think that gets stressed enough, right? We often see these silos in medicine, and I would say particularly in academic medicine, but I know it exists in practice too, where you're siloed sometimes and you feel, you know, I'm the only one who's responsible for my patient. Me, instead of group dynamic and group think, which I think is something we really could learn and benefit from the military mindset and infrastructure.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Phil. And you know, one of the things that I really liked about our team, which was deliberate and which we engaged in, was team building. And you were instrumental in that, ensuring that we had cohesion, unit cohesion. Okay. And you know, as the leader of the team, as it should have been and was, and then you have your team members, which were, you know, me, an advanced practice provider, and then, you know, our wonderful administrative assistant. And so the sentiment was not that I am better than anyone else. It's that we together will work to ensure that we fill any gaps, because no one person can take care of all aspects of what's involved in patient care and, you know, in medicine. So it is essential to be effective, and to be relevant, to have good teamwork.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will tell you, I've become much more conscious of this in my new role here, is because leadership is formally much more of a part of this, and trying to learn from, you know, some of the military structure. And listen, there are times I fail and do things poorly, but one of my very strong beliefs is that hierarchies need to exist, and they obviously exist in medicine, and they exist in the military. And in civilian medicine, I believe it's really for safety, right? Because you have to have kind of an order of leadership, or who's going to follow orders to make sure that patient safety is observed. But hierarchy does, and I make this very clear to my team, does not necessitate that one person is better than the other. And in fact, the person in the bottom of the hierarchy is just as important, if not more important, than the person at the top of the hierarchy. And I think that when the military is working well, I think that is part of the infrastructure. Please correct me if I'm off there.
No, you are completely on the mark with that one, for sure. So in the military, you know, in the Army, for sure, everyone has to follow the same, you know, everyone falls under the same tenets, of what the military's mission is. Okay, soldier first. So everyone understands what their role is, and that they're responsible for the next person, irrespective of rank. And in addition to that, the higher ranking you are, the more responsibility you have to your subordinates. Because one of the jobs is for a leader, or someone of a higher ranking, if you will, in terms of the hierarchy, is to make sure that the person below you that you're responsible for makes the next rank. So it's your responsibility to pull them up. Conversely, if a person of a higher ranking, of course in the military is, you know, it's hierarchy based, is not following the rules and or needs some type of correction or counsel, then it's a subordinate's responsibility to approach that conversation as well. And then I just wanted to mention one other thing. You said failure, and sometimes you fail and fail poorly. That's actually a another tenet, again, if you will, of leadership. We cannot become effective leaders if we do not fail at certain courses of actions. In fact, it's required to become an effective leader. Failure is required. It's a requirement. How else are we going to learn what we need to do to affect a certain situation?
It's really important. And I just want to point out for our audience too, you're, as usual, you're humble. You are the first woman XO or commanding officer of your battalion. And make sure I get that right. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you certainly know about leadership, and you taught me a lot about leadership when we worked together.
Well, I thank you for that, Phil. I was the flagship commander for the medical detachment, one of the medical detachments, the 336 medical detachments in our field hospital. And I am the first executive officer in the field hospital, female executive officer in the field hospital. And I think that's somewhat significant in that an executive officer is traditionally a male role. Keeping in mind also the military is dominated by males, but that particular position it's a rough position. It's a lot of work involved, a lot of logistics, a lot of operations. It's pretty nitty gritty. So I am honored, to be honest with you, to have been selected in that position. I feel very honored, and I still serve in that position as well.
Well, we're proud of you. So, to kind of flip it and say when things don't work well, and we see this in both the medicine and in the military, is when the hierarchy can actually create more harm than good. And it's often when there's a disconnect between the decision makers and the frontline workers, and whether we want to call that rank or hierarchy, but we see that in both fields too. And I don't know if you have any insights or examples that you want to share with us.
No, so I think that's very true. So in the military, what we say is, and I speak in the Army, in particular, if you will, because I am in the Army. Soldiers first. It's soldiers first, and what that means essentially is boots on the ground. Those who are fighting the fight, those are the folks that we have to take care of first and foremost. So what that means is essentially, as a leader, any strategy involved in trying to achieve the mission first involves the planning and preparation of ensuring that the boots on the ground soldiers, if you will, are taken care of. That means, well, what does that mean? That means that their families are taken care of. It means that we're in tune to their mental health and their physical health, and that we acknowledge that we all share the same human experiences, just on different levels, and being cognizant of that. And in the hierarchy, it is important to be able to step back and say, okay, what must I first do to take care of them first and foremost? Because if that doesn't happen, then we'll never get to the goal. We can't even begin to really affect our trajectory. So I say that because on the civilian side of the house, I think we often don't take into consideration the same thing, if you will. So those who are the support staff, if you will, the ancillary staff supporting the practices, they're the most important, if you will, on many levels, because they're doing all of the stuff to make it possible for us to be able to practice.
Absolutely. And they're the ones delivering the care to the patient, and often the most proximate to the patients and the people who we're focused on, right? And when you talk about mission-based care, at least in civilian medicine, I mean, the mission are the patients. At least I think that analogy holds true.
Yes. I think we sometimes we get this false sense of security that we are working in isolation and that we can do things on our own and that we can take care of things on our own, and we simply cannot. It does take teamwork.
So just to kind of finish out the analogies with military and medicine, there is trauma that is seen in both fields, and you've got to learn how to deal with the trauma. And there are also huge personal sacrifices that happen on both ends. And I think, interestingly, one of the last connections that Dr. Epstein brings is that reflection and self-awareness are not necessarily a part of each professional culture. But part of the reason you and I are talking today is because that's changing in the military for certain. And so we're going to kind of talk about some of the ways the military addresses reflection, self-awareness, leadership, and trying to promote healthy culture.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, I do think that self-discipline and humility and emotional intelligence are required to be successful in both military and civilian medicine. It's very similar, depending on what side of the house you're on in terms of the trauma and, seeing deaths and the stress that goes along with just being, having made the choice to give selfless service to your patients. I think that's true on both sides. To be honest with you, I think it's fair and I think it's equal. I was a nurse before I joined the military, and I'd seen a lot already, having had worked in critical care. So, that same level of of self-discipline, of having to be able to check ourselves, check our emotions, and kind of, categorize, put all of that stuff, if you will, in a certain category in our brain and in our lives, holds true on both sides of the house.
Yeah, and it brings us, there's some great analogies from, I don't know if it's military teaching or military lore, but things like understanding what the ground truth is, right? The ground truth is a military expression that says what's actually happening on the ground, not what the intel or the report says, but what are people actually telling you that's happened? And I think that's really an important perspective for medical providers outside of the military. You need to understand what's happening with your patients, what's happening in the operating room, in the clinics, and your procedure suites, what's happening with your nurses and nurse practitioners and PAs and physician extenders, our administrative assistants, as they interact with our patients. What is the ground truth for how we process through these things? And I think it's a point you're getting to, and it's very well recognized.
Yeah. And so that, that kind of lends into culture as well. So every unit in the Army is not, cookie cutter. It's not exactly the same. There are different cultural ways and different values that shape each unit. And so we have to adjust. We have to have the mental agility to be able to say, okay, in this environment, this is what is needed to be able to take care of patients. And the exact same holds true on the civilian side as well, depending on where you are. This population needs this. And that's the ground truth. The ground truth is being able to be large-minded enough to see that it's not about us. It's not about us. It's not about what we want necessarily to give. It's about what the population needs from us.
That's great. And if anyone's interested in some of these kind of medical directions, there's something called Funk's fundamentals, which are 40 fundamental sayings that are true of kind of military training. And they're not all applicable to medicine, but I pulled some of them out. And some of them have to do with military structure, which I think are directly applicable to medical structure. And so I'll just kind of share some of them and then get your reaction to them. So first, trust but verify. I mean, we say that all of the time in medicine. Good units do routine things routinely. So do the routine well. Don't let analysis cause paralysis. Don't get caught up in the numbers when you really have someone right in front of you. The Army, or medicine, if you want to change the term, is a people business at its core. And humans can learn in one of two ways, either through emotional experience or through repetition. And that's how we can enhance our own learning and our own structure. And lastly, a good idea only becomes great when it's shared with others.
So trust but verify is what I preach to my soldiers when I see them. It is so incredibly important to be able to close the loop. And closing the loop is super important because that's how we're able to complete a mission. So trust but verify is super, super important. And the other thing it does, it also facilitates good communication, because we all have different ideas of how we think, or what we think, what has been said, or what the expectations are. So trust but verify helps to basically get stuff done, if you will.
Yeah. And I think it's also, I was just going to say, it's really important for people too. Trust but verify doesn't mean that you don't trust or like or believe in the person who gave you that initial information. It's not, it has nothing to do with that. It's literally verifying for the good of the mission or the good of the patient.
Absolutely. And it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It's the professional thing to do. And the end result, or the end goal, is going to be completion, which is what we're looking for. Because without that, then there may be assumptions that are just lingering.
So I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to comment on. Otherwise, I wanted to transition a little bit into kind of some of the leadership thoughts in military.
Yep, sounds good.
All right. So I want to start actually with your personal experience. Tell us about, you were deployed very early on in the COVID crisis to the Javits Center in New York. Tell us about your COVID experiences, what you saw, and tell us how it kind of influenced or affected your understanding of leadership and how to work in these military medical settings.
So I have to say, I think the military overall has learned a lot from the last few wars that we've had. We've learned a lot from the Iraqi war. I did deploy during Operation Enduring Freedom, and the the wars previously. So I think the military is really up with the times, if you will. When we mobilized so in the Army Reserves, if you're in the active Army Reserves, basically you are technically can get mobilized within 72 hours. Okay. Every unit is supposed to be mission ready and ready to move within 72 hours. So last year was actually the first time in the Army's history, because the Army by definition deploys outside of the United States. So that was the first time in the Army's history that we actually deployed, if you will, on our own ground. Okay. I will say that I was, we had our hiccups, and anybody who knows, who's been in the Army for one day, knows that you have to hurry up and wait. Okay, is what we say. But I was exceptionally surprised at how efficiently we were able to move within such a short period of time. I think it was something like 12 to 13 days that the Army mobilized such a large group to the Javits Center, and then there were a few other areas as well within the United States. It was more efficient than I thought. So, and then our infection control piece, that part of it as well, was very effective, and I was very impressed by that. We had the public health, the public health command. They're not a part of the military, but the Department of Defense. They assisted us as well and basically handled most of the infection control piece. That part was very efficient. So at the Javits, it was a large convention center. Really affected me in that the population that was there were folks majority who did not have insurance, immigrants, poor folks, folks from nursing homes, vulnerable populations, essentially. And we were able to provide as, the best care possible that we could in the shortest amount of time. One of the things that I took away from that was this incredible sense of how privileged I am, and we all are in the U.S. And to have insurance, to have a good job. That's the biggest takeaway that I got from that. It was not a nice experience at all. It was great in that all of the providers that went there, we all had the same goal. Everybody was helpful. All the physicians that came, that were there, advanced practice providers, nurses, medics, we all worked together with the common goal of trying to save these folks' lives in a situation where, there were so many unknown variables.
Yeah, it's, well, thank you for your time and thank you for your service. And I know it was an incredible, we'll just call it an incredible experience and leave it at that. But, one of the things I'd like to ask you just in a little follow-up on that is, how did you take care of each other? How did the military foster kind of that personal care for each other, given the trauma and the stress and the tough living conditions and the nightmarish stuff you guys had to see on a daily basis? How did you guys take care of each other?
So we were very fortunate to have really good commanders. I think the Army overall chooses really good commanders, meaning, they're not chosen by one particular person, but in terms of the qualifications needed for a commander. We had really good commanders who really cared about us, okay? And I think the Army really did put into place the soldiers first piece. So all you really have when you mobilize is the person to your left and the person to your right. And we all know that. And that camaraderie kind of kicks in pretty quickly. And folks just begin to be, they just kind of settle down into the natural human aspect of caring for one another. So it's actually quite innate, if you will. In that particular instance, during the Javits, we didn't have access to much. So oftentimes when we mobilize with the military, if we're in the desert, it's not much to give, but the Army will make sure you have a couple of gyms. They'll set up a tent and you have a couple of gyms. We'll mark out a spot and we'll run in the sand. It was a little bit different with Javits in that everybody was in isolation. So what we did was we just talked to one another and we, shared snacks with one another. And as mundane and as simple as it seems, it meant a lot. We reached out to our family members to check on our comrades' family members who they were worried about. So while rudimentary, that's how we cared for one another. And the Army also had the same. They had folks in the rear. If you need us to reach out to your family, we will. And so, in that particular instance, for that mobilization, that's how we took care of one another. And the last thing I want to say about that is this: our commanders showed up. Those commanders, those high-level commanders, they showed up. They showed up. They brought us outside. We could only stay outside for a short period of time. And they said, look, we can't stay long because of the rules or whatever, but we're here and we want you to know that we're here. So that meant a lot.
Yeah, it brings up a couple other of the Funk's fundamentals that I want to share. And the first one it brings to mind is leadership is a contact sport and it requires daily interaction. And I think your commanding officer set a great example by doing that. Another point, another fundamental, I think, brought up by your story and your sharing here: no one cares how much you know until they know that you care. And I think that's true, obviously in the military, but I think that's true in medicine too, whether we're talking about working in our teams, working with our patients, right? No one cares how smart you are, how good you are at what you do, if they don't feel a sense of caring from you. And I think that's a really important aspect of leadership. And the last thing I want to bring up is high standards, positive outlook, and excellence are all contagious. And I think that's a great lesson that we all can learn from.
Absolutely. So Phil, one thing I can say is that I still have the pleasure and the honor of seeing some of your former patients, and across the board, what they say to me is how much they miss you and how much you cared for them, and how they felt like they just felt at ease because you essentially let them know through your mannerisms, your actions, and your words that you were going to take care of them, and that they were like family to you. I hear that almost daily. And so, yes, folks act on feelings. We humans, we act on emotions. If we feel, how we feel is going to, help dictate how we act. And so it's super important. Nobody's going to want to follow you if they don't think you actually care about them, or you're invested in them on some level, on some emotional level. Leadership is absolutely not innate. That's one of the things that I have learned since I've been in leadership in the Army. You would think it might be. You would think, because you have folks who are so, educationally, have educationally, I guess the word I was looking for, their aptitude is so high, and that their intellect seems so, what's the word I'm looking for? The intellect seems so kind of rare, if you will. One would think that person would be a natural leader. It's not true. It's not true. Leadership is not innate, nor is it defined by educational or societal status. I think it's a rare skill that's shaped by integrity, self-awareness, maturity, humility, intellect, and personal experiences. And I also believe that mentorship is a prerequisite in leadership development as well.
Yeah, I think those are all phenomenal points, and it's going to be a beautiful segue into our kind of next section. But I wanted to just thank you for sharing the story about my patients. And I always try and keep in mind the Maya Angelou quote, which I'm going to ruin, but something along the lines of people won't necessarily remember what you say or what you did to them, but they'll remember the way you made them feel. And I think that's really important. We get caught up sometimes in the nuts and bolts in medicine, and what's the diagnosis, what are our treatment strategies. And while all of that is incredibly important, it's also important how we care for people and how they feel cared for. And I joke with my patients all the time, at most, as a surgeon, at most 50% of what we do is surgical. The other half or more is talking people through these things, helping them understand it, making them feel safe,
right,
in understanding that we're going to do something invasive to them. And it's with the hope of getting them better. And while we want things to go perfectly, they don't often go perfectly, but we can care for them throughout that process. And it's challenging. I think that's the hardest part of surgery.
Well, you've done an amazing job at that, with that film. And, I've watched you and have had, once again, I use the word honor, but I mean that, the honor of being able to see you treat folks that way, and treat your patients that way, and treat everyone that way. And it is important to be around, that folks who, are doing as well as you, or if not better, in terms of how you want to treat others, because it is infectious.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And to your other point, I mean, I've had some phenomenal mentors in my career who've shown me the way, sometimes explicitly and sometimes just, kind of by example and by being around them. And I'll tell you, I'm sure your example's the same. I mean, listen, we also have, I'll call it negative mentorship, right? Examples you don't want to lead by, and you can learn a lot from learning how you don't want to behave as well too. And we can all, I think we should all try and lead by positive example. We want people to act the way we do in a positive direction, but there's certainly people out there who have less than ideal behaviors or interactions, and we can learn from those too.
No, absolutely. It's important to be able to try not to judge first, and to step back and see what lesson we can get out of situations. Sometimes we don't know what we just don't know. And you're absolutely right. To be able to take something positive out of a negative requires skill as well. And it's important. It's important to do it if we're able to do that.
And one of the things you turned me on to about military training, and I find it absolutely fascinating, is that the military, especially in leadership, has really embraced kind of holistic health and fitness. And for anybody who's interested in reading more and learning more about this, there's I hope I use the right term here, but a unclassified document called Field Manual 7-22, which you can Google and find, which is really about holistic health and fitness in the military. And the chapter progression is phenomenal. It talks about principles and phases of physical training. But what I found really fascinating is chapter 9, which is about mental readiness. And you can see in this entire manual, it goes through nutritional readiness, spiritual readiness, sleep readiness, all of these other things that you wouldn't necessarily think that the military does. But once you read through it, you understand why these things are so important to military training and military leadership. And so once again, if anybody's interested, look up Field Manual 7-22. And Tanya and I are going to talk about some of it today.
Yes. At the very core of the Army, which is a unified land operations organization, at the core of everything that I've said, at the heart, the nuts and the bolts of all of that is mental and physical readiness.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And the objective way they describe it in the field manual, and when you're talking about soldiers and in the more traditional sense, soldiers with armed soldiers in combat, you're talking about lethality, right? And the more lethal soldiers can protect themselves, protect each other, and achieve a mission. But that comes through physical readiness and mental toughness. But the analogy is true whether you're trying to be lethal or not. If you're being an effective physician or an effective nurse practitioner or an effective business person, right? Physical readiness, mental toughness are part of what we do.
That's right. That's right. So, to know what your mission is, civilian side, military side of the house. What's the mission? Okay. Unfortunately, there are casualties. There are going to be casualties, and on the civilian side or the military side. And knowing this, and this is what what we've chosen. Okay, so this is on us. And then 2, that this is a part of the process, if you will. How am I going to handle that? How am I setting myself up for success? How am I preparing myself for the inevitable? What insurance am I putting into place? Not if, but when this occurs.
Yeah, and I love it. And in a very military fashion, it's very objective. And I'll just read one quote. Mental readiness promotes resilient soldiers, adaptive leaders, and cohesive teams, particularly leaders who thrive in uncertainty and chaos. They visualize, describe, direct, lead, and assess operations in a complex environment against adaptive enemies. And while that's meant to be combat experience, or that's what they're talking about specifically there, the analogies to medicine, and whether it's medicine in the military or civilian medicine, are, I think, very true to what we do on a daily basis.
No, absolutely. So, we have those known variables. We're going to, you're going to into surgery, and these are the potential things that could happen, and this is how you're going to deal with it. And the guidelines say this, and your training says that. You've got that. But what's not always factored in to that portion right there is the emotional aspect of it. Okay, that's the wild card. The wild card for us all on both sides in medicine is what could trip us up? What emotionally could change us? Is it someone else in the OR that, something happens to them? Is it something I don't necessarily expect during the surgery? And, on the military side of the house, it's the exact same thing. So how am I going to navigate that emotional aspect of that portion?
Yeah, and and I think it's fascinating the way the military addresses this too. And they base it down, basically say, listen, stressful situations are have to do with arousal control, and we see our heart rate go up, we see our breathing rates go up, and we can handle and modulate those things for better outcomes in these situations. And the way to practice that, and this is something I've taken into my life now, is actually through physical stress, working out,
Mm-hmm.
tough physical activities. They get your heart rate
Mm-hmm.
up, they get you breathing
Mm-hmm.
fast, they put you under stress. And then if you can kind of handle those situations, that mimics the physiologic response you may see, whether it's with a difficult patient or in the operating room and things aren't going well. You can mimic those physiologic stresses. So when you're actually in that situation, you know how to handle at least the emotional side of that. And I think that's fascinating.
Absolutely. So, you hit the nail on the head. So in the Army, first and foremost, if you don't meet the physical requirements, the Army's physical fitness requirements, you will be processed out of the Army at some point. And it's for all of those reasons, essentially, that you just mentioned. It is because there is a large physical burden that's required in terms of carrying equipment and having to be on your feet for long periods of time and in stressful environments with nothing but what you have on your back. And that goes for medical folks too, depending on the environment in the military. And so that promotes good physical fitness, requires self-discipline, and self-discipline helps to promote um, mental readiness, because of course that's what's needed for the self-discipline. And so you're right, it does set you up. Being able to push through that which you didn't necessarily think you could on a physical level is going to be very helpful in super stressful situations. Carrying your weapon, having to fire your weapon. In order to be a good shot, you have to be able to regulate your breathing, or your shot is going to be off. So everything that you just said, and it does hold true on both sides of the house, on the civilian side and the military side of the house.
Yeah, and I think the military also does. So they talk about ways to kind of control your physiology, and the sniper example is great, or any marksman example of controlling your breathing. But it's not just that. And some of the things they specifically talk about that are applicable to medicine, performance imagery, right? So working through mental rehearsals of what you're going to do. It helps if you're physically stressed at that moment too, because then you can work on your physiology. But I think most importantly, which you wouldn't necessarily think the military would be teaching, but positive emotions, being enthusiastic, active, optimistic, hopeful, all of those things, whether it's through self-talk, whether it's through objective goal setting with your unit, or whether it's just through unit cohesion, all of these things are so important to a successful military identity. And I think it's directly applicable to what we do.
Oh, absolutely. So, unit cohesion, good unit morale, good morale, team building, these aspects of, helping everyone in a group to feel a part of, which helps to foster good emotions, positive outlook. All of this is fostered, on the military side of the house, um, to help prepare and get us ready for being able to handle individual stressors.
And, one of the other things I talk about that's so important is interpersonal communication. And it's broken down kind of into communication as well as engagement, where engagement refers to kind of how well a soldier is attuned to the mission and the team. And, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us some of the, training you went through for communication and engagement, how do you make your unit more engaged? How do you work on your communication skills? Because I believe you and 100% agree with you that this is not innate. These are skills that can be learned and taught and fostered. So how did the military train you in these situations?
So I will say first and foremost, this is probably the most difficult aspect of leadership is effective communication, for sure, and without question whatsoever. Um, One is authenticity. I think overall, humans in general can appreciate authenticity from a leader if they're designated as their leader, chosen as their leader, whatever that leadership looks like. So authenticity is first and foremost. I try to keep things simple as a leader. I do first. Another thing is, when I took command, I sat down with every single solitary soldier in my unit and had a conversation. What do you do? What's going on? What does your family look like? What are your goals, your aspirations, so on and so forth. I have an open door policy. If you need me, here we go. So that's kind of sort of how I started that. And then the other aspect is MDNP, which is the military decision-making process. So, the Army has an acronym for everything. Whatever it is, whatever the term was, it's going to be changed into an acronym for sure. So MDMP, the military decision making process. And that's kind of where I start with my soldiers in terms of making sure that everybody understands that there's a process. There's a process that we have to follow. We all have to follow that process. And you get to also give your input along the way. And so in shaping the process and just shaping the decision-making processes along the way. And and by the way, it's actually mandatory that you do this for your leadership development. So I don't know if that kind of answers the question, but that's kind of how I approach that part. And what I have found is that when soldiers, one, think that I'm just as human as they, and then number two, that I actually trust them, that I trust that they can make decisions and that their contributions are important, everything else just kind of falls into place.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think it makes a lot of sense whether you're in a military or civilian setting. So we've talked through a lot of things today. I just want to give you the opportunity. What else do you want to tell the audience? What else do you want to talk about? Are there questions you have?
I don't have any questions. I do think that being able to appreciate the human experience is super important in being an effective leader. In terms of selflessness, being able to see what everyone in the group needs in addition to the needs of yourself, is always going to be required for effective leadership. Excuse me. And that I just feel incredibly honored and fortunate to be able to serve in the United States military. It's just been amazing for me to be able to live a regular life, if you will, as a mother, as a practitioner, and to be able to serve others is just it's just very important to me, and I just feel very humbled that I'm able to have these opportunities to be able to give to others. That's it, really. And I thank you, Phil. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your service, and thank all of the military members out there who serve, particularly in the medical units, who we learn a ton from. And I would encourage you, if you have not worked with a military provider, to spend some time with them, because they will enrich your understanding of leadership, of working in a team, of mission goals, all of those things. And I learned a ton from you specifically, and I've learned a lot from others I've interacted with. And I think we have a lot to learn from the military, and we have a lot to be thankful for people who make sacrifices like you do for the betterment of our country, for the betterment of our people, for the betterment of this world. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And once again, it's actually my honor and my pleasure to do so.
So I'm just going to walk through some summary points, and feel free to make comments as you want. But these are some things I jotted down I think are really important that we covered today. So, as we think about kind of contrasts and comparisons between the military medicine and military medicine, what you do or what you fail to do affects the entire group. And so as you climb up the hierarchy of leadership, no matter what context you're in, you are responsible to train and provide your wisdom and knowledge to the people underneath that hierarchy, so that everyone, that the whole group moves forward. So really important is the soldier first mentality, and to have a mission orientation, right? To be mindful and thoughtful and intentional in the way we process it, but we put each other at the forefront of that, and take care of the people you work with and the people that deliver care. I love that which you've flat out said, that you higher your rank means the more responsibility you have to your subordinates. And you can foster that development and foster that rank by being authentic, by keeping your conversations and your mission simple for people to understand, but really focusing on the human experience, being selfless, and putting the group's needs before your own needs.
I think that holds true in every aspect of life for leadership. Whether you're in the military, whether you're a top CEO somewhere, whether you're a top surgeon such as yourself, Phil, these are the basics. These are the basics, and I don't think that I didn't invent them. For sure, I had great mentors. You've actually been a great mentor, Phil, a leader. You've helped to groom me, and I've taken some of your positives and then incorporated them into my practice. And some things just don't change. My dad used to say to me as I was growing up, humans are thinly veiled. We think that we're not, but we are. And human experiences are shared by all humans. So, simply put, we're pretty much all living the same life, and some things are just not rocket science. And then, and just are going to just need to happen in order to operate a certain way. And I believe, pretty much in a nutshell, and you summed it up well, and thank you for that, Phil, that which you've said is necessary for effective leadership.
Well, thank you. And just point out, mentorship goes both ways. I learned a ton from you as well, and from your experiences. So I'd like to thank you for being here. I'd like to thank the audience for listening. I hope there's a lot of really good pearls and nuggets and practical advice in this talk today and this conversation. So I hope you enjoyed, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you for having me, Phil. I appreciate it.